Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be back. Now, if you're seeing this on October 31st, happy Halloween. This writing is specific to Halloween, but also the days that follow. It's called As the Veil Thins, a blessing for those who remember. But if this is the first time you're seeing me, my name is Rev Karla. I'm an ordained interfaith, interspiritual minister and author of the book, Deconstructing, Leaving Church, Finding Faith. Now, you can find this in bookstores, but you can also get a signed copy of this at the TikTok shop or revkarla.com. I help people heal from Christian patriarchy and find spirituality after leaving church. And this is my vlog, Spirituality Matters. So today is about the thinning of the veil. And if you don't know what that is, you might find today's vlog inspirational. Let's start with just the tradition here in America, because it's safe to assume that most children in America, they don't really understand the history of Halloween beyond the trick-or-treating. And honestly, who can blame them? Because we're pretty capitalistic here, focused on capitalism, and we prioritize consumption over everything, including tradition. And I know I certainly didn't understand it growing up here in America. All I knew for my part was that we couldn't wear scary masks to our church's annual Halloween party. They had to be funny or cute. So we ended up with a lot of those really creepy plastic masks. Do you remember those? And you could stick your tongue and it was out a little bit out of those and you just were sweating behind them. They were really, really gross. So we'd wear those to church and we'd sit in a circle and we would try to guess who was behind each mask. So they had to be cute and funny, like I said, and they couldn't be scary. But as I was writing this, the thing that came up for me was this creepy guy who always wore the same mask year after year, and it was this Santa mask. And it was just the way his eyes looked from behind that plastic Santa mask. I mean, he looked more demonic than any of the scary demon mask that you might see out when people were trick-or-treating. And I always made a mental note that I did not want to be left alone with this guy. Even after we unmasked and I looked at him, I thought, yeah, he is pretty creepy. But then after we guessed who people were, we took off our masks, then that was the fun time when we got punch and cookies and we were all sent home with these cute little Halloween bags that the church ladies had prepared. And it really wasn't until I began writing about my deconstructing journey after leaving church that I started to explore where the tradition of Halloween really came from, because I was questioning everything. And in the early days of writing about my deconstructing, if I really didn't have anything to share, a lot of this I was openly doing on social media. I was just writing about my journey. If I couldn't find anything or nothing was coming up for me to write about myself or my journey, I would go to the calendar and I would look for on this day kind of stories. And I would use several different sources. And that's how I stumbled into the rich history of this season, whether it's Halloween or Samhain or All Saints Day or All Souls Day or the Day of the Dead. I won't even try to say that in Spanish because I know I'll just mess it up. Each of these days, they really do hold deep ritual and tradition. And a lot of that is born from that belief in the thinning of the veil. And this veil is believed to be what is seen, what is between the seen and the unseen. It's said to grow soft or thin this time of year, and some say they can even sense it, even if they don't have language for what they're sensing. I often see this in the types of stories that people are posting. They share stories about their loved ones. I just saw someone post about their wife who passed about 9 years ago, and he said he awoke this morning with such a strong longing and sorrow for her. Some people might say it's just because of the holidays. We're starting to sense it. If you haven't been out in the stores yet, they're just all kinds of holiday decorations, and even one place I heard music. The holiday season is certainly here, and it seems like often that Halloween here in America kind of just heralds that season in. And sometimes those memories and the longing and the sorrow kind of arise because of the season, but could it also be something more spiritual? Something unseen, which is the thinning of the veil. And if you look at what our ancestors believed and those traditions, they didn't have any commercialization towards the holidays that we do. So something was there for them to desire to create those kinds of traditions that are really anchored in this time of year. A really good conversation to have about this is this concept of acculturation, because I think, especially here in America, that's what has happened. Now, if you have never heard the word acculturation, it's the process of adopting the traits or social patterns of another group. And that's nothing new here in America, where we have borrowed, we've rebranded, we've monetized, we've appropriated from other traditions and cultures and people what was once sacred. And if you think about it, and I know this is a very big, hot topic, when you think of sports teams that are named after Native nations, to fashion houses using traditional garments and calling them aesthetic, we have a long history of co-opting what we do not understand. And organized religion is no exception to this. Because centuries ago, the Christian church began a strategic campaign of this type of cultural absorption. And some people will argue that wasn't intentional. It was just an attempt to fit into local customs already familiar to people. Or was it? Because others will say, and I'm kind of among them, that this kind of placement of the church holidays around these already established traditions, they seem to be more deliberate. To me, they are a form of acculturation that aligned religion with already some of the established power. And some people will say, well, that just made sense. Yeah, but what ended up happening over time is that sometimes people had a mandate where they were required to abandon their ancient practices and rituals and replace them with Christianity. So even in spite of that, those traditions lived on. The ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, and if you don't know how to spell it, you might want to go check out my blog, because it is not spelled anything like it sounds. So that marks the end of the harvest and the descent into winter's darkness. And this is why bonfires were lit, and it was to ward off the spirits, and families held vigils to welcome the souls of their dead. Because the people also knew that winter would come whether they were ready or not. So this marked the time when people knew they had to prepare, not just their homes, not just the food, not just their protection from the elements, but their hearts. Because once again, this thinning of the veil was something that they respected and honored. So back to the church, by the early 7th century, one of the popes consecrated the Roman pantheon to honor, quote, all saints. And that original feast was set for May 13th. But 2 centuries later, Pope Gregory III moved it to November 1st. And then Pope Gregory IV made it universal across Christianity. And then around the year 1000, All Souls Days was added to honor the faithfully departed. So you had All Saints Day to honor all the saints that had been consecrated in the church. And then you had All Souls Day so that you could honor all people who had passed on. So in this way, the church layered new meaning over old practices, and people say that not necessarily to erase traditions like Samhain, but kind of absorbing its rhythm into a Christian reframe. But like I said, for many of us, what we say that's acculturation. When you're taking something and you're kind of supplanting behind it, especially when then there are mandates that these traditions must be followed then, or there's even subtle requirements that one may take precedence over the other, then you can start to see that there's a problem. Okay, so back to Halloween. Many of our favorite Halloween traditions, they carry remnants of those earlier worlds. And I think this is really fascinating to go study. So if this is something you're interested in, just for yourself, go read about where the tradition of bobbing for apples came from, because at first it was about putting a woman's name on an apple, and whoever's apple a man bit was to be his destined partner. I'm not sure how legit that was, but I'm sure it was a lot of fun for the folks back then. I don't remember us putting names on it now, and thank goodness, because when we did that, we were really young. But also the jack-o'-lantern. It began as an Irish folktale around a trickster named Jack, and he was supposedly doomed to wander the earth with a burning coal inside a hollowed turnip, and I think that's kind of funny. Then there are soul cakes, which were exchanged for the prayers for the dead. So this was like an ancestral tradition to our modern trick-or-treat. So people would exchange these soul cakes in honor of those who had passed. And then there are black cats. They do have a lot of symbolism around mystery and feminine power, but oftentimes they were cast as omens of evil. And even today, I can't speak across the country, but I know here in Indiana, there are shelters who will not adopt out black cats during the holidays, and they will also advise people to keep their black cats indoors for fear of cruelty to animals. Come on, people, let's do better. So we're really far removed from those traditions where we may pause and be grateful for a bountiful harvest or for prayers to cover us during the winter months, because we basically just go to the wall, turn on the heat, and we're good for the winter. But just like I said at the beginning of this video, there's still a lot of emotion tied around this season. And for many people, just because the days are shortened and the nights are longer, the air is colder, that tends to open some vulnerable places in us where the mind, the heart, the body may remember loss, and sorrow and grief may rise up for you. And like I said, just the start of the holiday season alone can awaken deep grief. But not only for those who have died, but for family fractures, unmet hopes, or the ghost of our lives that we may have imagined for ourselves that never came to fruition. We also know that this time of year, there's a lot of stress around it, whether it's financial, loneliness, family conflict, and the weight of a seasonal darkness. It's as if everything that aches beneath the surface suddenly grows louder. And I want to turn this to my deconstructing people for a minute, because when you layer that with the weaponized grief often found in high control or evangelical spaces, it's no wonder so many of us struggle to find peace this time of year. So what does that weaponized grief look like in those spaces? What we often find is that when someone experiences some kind of tragic event or even just a loss, the focus isn't on comforting the mourner. It's on saving souls. And oftentimes, celebrations of lives or funerals, they become more like sermons. And grief is kind of pushed off to the side. So grieving people are often told things like their loved ones are in a better place, or they're warned that only believers will see them again. And just go look at the comments of some of my videos where I've spoken about this. It's heartbreaking to hear how many people weren't allowed to openly grieve their loved ones or something that happened to them because of these kinds of weaponized grief or suppressed sorrow that would demand that you suppress that so that you would focus on the will of God. I don't know how many funerals I've attended where at the end there was a call to salvation. And I vowed, even as a young girl, that if I ever got the opportunity to hold the space for someone's pain, I would do it better than some of the pastors that I heard at some of these funerals. Because telling someone who's really missing their loved one that at least they're in heaven, that isn't helping them understand that we were given these ranges of emotion because we're human. And we shouldn't deny that some of them exist in us, because I believe that if they're not processed healthily, they will come back in some other form. So we must think about this if we're going to tell somebody that you need to be strong for others or it's God's will, because oftentimes that is replacing compassion with justification, and that is not what somebody needs. Sometimes what they need is simply presence. But when faith prioritizes eternal destinations over emotional presence, it teaches us to fear sorrow instead of feeling it. Grief becomes something to get over, not through. But grief, when it is honored, can become one of our greatest teachers. It's a sacred mirror that reflects how deeply we have loved. So during the holidays, that tension can be excruciating. You're told to be happy for your loved ones because they're in heaven. Yet, you're left with a gaping hole where comfort should be. So let's just pause here for a moment and think about what is the way through grief. And I'm going to be honest, beautiful soul, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. For many of us, grief is our constant companion. And it often shows up uninvited. How many of you have all of a sudden had this feeling of really strong loss show up when you hear a song, or you smell something, or you see a flower, or you see a movie, or you're just on a drive and you remember the last time you were there with your loved one, or it could be an anniversary date. Grief is so much broader and more expansive than we were ever taught to believe, and perhaps that was by design. Because if we were allowed to grieve the loss of jobs, friendships, freedoms, or marriages as openly as our heart begs us to, we might stop prioritizing systems that depend on our silence. So think about that. Maybe that really hits home for you, especially if you were taught that grief is something to overcome rather than something that walks beside you your entire life. And sometimes it'll tap you on the shoulder and it will invite you to remember. For me, the way through grief isn't just to plow through it. The way through it is presence, quiet, compassion that doesn't need to fill the silence. Sometimes it's tears when they come, or it's laughter when memories bring joy for what was but is no more. Consider some rituals for gratitude and sorrow, especially this time of year, because across cultures, this time of year offers those type of rituals that hold both gratitude and sorrow. They remind us that grief isn't a flaw, but a thread that binds the living to the dead. So, light a candle. Say the names of your loved one. Cook their favorite meal, set an empty space at the table, walk among the trees and listen for what they whisper back. You can honor what was, and religion is not required. You can honor what is no more without fear. Beautiful soul, the veil is thin, but it shouldn't frighten us. It's here to remind us that love never fully departs. There is a book that I read many years ago called Three Dog Night. And in that, writer Abigail Thomas wrote about this indigenous Australian phrase, for a night so cold you need 3 dogs to stay warm. And in her grief from losing her husband, that's exactly what she had. Her dogs were her literal and spiritual companions. Perhaps this is your time to answer, what are your 3 dogs? Who or what keeps you warm when the night grows long? Who can you trust to hold your story without trying to fix you? Rumi said the wound is the place where the light enters you. Perhaps this is what this season is all about. This is a season where we carry the wounds because we're opening to the light. As we move through this season, I want to offer a blessing. And may this blessing hold you gently, and may you find peace in the remembering. Holy One, Divine Mystery, you who are known by so many names, Thank you for yet another turning of the earth, for this thinning veil between the seen and unseen, for every soul we have loved and lost, for the pets who journeyed with us, for the stories that broke our hearts, and those that strengthened our courage to carry on, for every lesson sorrow has taught, and for every flicker of light that still burns within us. We give thanks. May the coming months be gentle and just what we need. May we find warmth when the nights grow cold. And may we remember always that to love deeply is to be alive. Blessed be. Now, if this season feels especially heavy for you, please remember you are not alone. Support exists, even if all you can do right now is take one small breath, one small step. Please call 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. Help is available. All right, my friends, that's it for today. If what we talked about resonates, I invite you to check out my book, Deconstructing. It's not just my story, it's a companion for anyone healing from church harm or seeking something sacred beyond religion. And for those of you who want to go deeper, I teach and write more on Substack, where you can also find the written version of today's video. We're also starting a private discussion group there soon for my Deconstructing readers. Thank you for being here. See you soon.